So I'm going to review this process really quickly, and I'll show you a couple different ways to create these dependencies. As I delete this, I want to point out that we did inherit an additional tag once we set up the set-driven key, and I'll draw that your attention to that here in just a bit. So I'm going to delete the two components that I have inside my scene, and I'm going to introduce a cube and a sphere, and also introduce a light into the equation. Now, I'll move this light kind of up and out of the way, and I'll leverage the light here in just a moment. Now, I'm going to choose the cube, and just for kicks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do essentially the same thing that I did last time, but rather than causing a move-rotation relationship, I'm just going to build this so that when I move this object along one axis, it drives the other object off according to another axis. So I have the cube selected. I'm going to find the Y value of the position. I'm going to right-click, choose animation, and set that as the driver. So again, the cube, when I move that along the Y-axis, which we've just set here, that becomes the driver. Okay. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select the sphere, and I'll just choose, let's say, the X position of the sphere. So in other words, when I lift the cube up along the Y-axis, it's going to drive the sphere off onto the X-axis. So I'll right-click on the X of the sphere, I'll go to animation, and I'll set driven relative. Now as soon as I set driven, there's a new little tag that pops up here, and we'll take a look at that in a later presentation. But there's a tag here that allows us to control the relationship a little bit more thoroughly. I'm going to make sure that my set driver, set driven relationship is working properly. I'm going to grab the cube and I'll pick that up along the Y-axis, and I can see that it's causing my sphere to move. So not only can we modify the relationship of content, we know that we can cause rotations to happen, we can cause position changes to happen. We can also affect pretty much any parameter inside the scene. So if I go back to my cube is set as the driver at this point. That hasn't changed. So anything that I set as driven at this point is going to refer back to the Y position of the cube. And what I mean by that is until I set another parameter as driven, everything is going to assume that the Y position of the cube has been the driver. So I'm going to go back to the light field, the light that I created. I'm going to go to the General tab, and I'm going to find the intensity field. Okay, and we know that we can slide this value around. It changes the intensity of the light. Well, if I right-click on the intensity and I go to the animation pull-down menu, I can set driven as relative. Okay, so now what I get is when I go back to the cube and I move that cube around, I'm driving the position of the cube, but I'm also causing the sphere to move, and I'm changing the intensity of the light. Okay, so I've built a relationship. You'll notice that here in the Object Manager, we have now the light has a tag on it, and if I select that tag, it says that this is an espresso tag, and it's translating a position Y to the intensity. Okay, now we'll take a look at that relationship a little bit closer in the next presentation, but for now, create a couple of objects and try to manipulate the position of the rotation based on a controller object. Now, just a reminder, I'm going to delete all these objects. I'll create a cube, and this time around I'll create a cylinder. I need to define my driver first, and I need to define the parameter of the driver. And so if I go to the coordinate menu of the cube, and I'm going to continue to use the Y value just for consistency, I'm going to right-click, go to animation, and set that as the driver. Now at this point I can run around the scene and I can select multiple components, and I could just keep setting them as driven. Until I change the driver in the scene, every driven is going to relate back to the Y position of this cube. If I go to the cylinder, not only can I affect the coordinates, but for some reason if I wanted to, I could affect, let's say, the height of this parametric primitive. So I'll go to animation, set driven relative, and so now that when I go to the cube, as I change the height of the cube, it changes the height, excuse me, as I change the position along the y-axis of the cube, it changes the height of the cylinder. So take some time, experiment with these concepts, play around, do it in a standalone file. You're not going to break anything, and get that procedure down of set driver, set driven, and we'll start to look at the implications and apply that inside our Exploded View project. And we'll do that in the next presentation.